Hi, so today is 18 June. Just yesterday on 17 June, President Trump at the Treaty of Versailles signed the Memorandum of Understanding, or frankly the Armistice Agreement, or frankly the surrender document, ending the war with Iran. It's a disaster. But at any rate, he signed it. And of course, watching this makes me think of none other than Admiral Castex. Now, long-term viewers and followers of me, either on YouTube or on my Substack, know that I'm more than a little obsessed with Raoul Castex. And you ask, who the hell is Admiral Raoul Castex? Admiral Castex, who did most of his writing in the 1920s and 1930s, is by far modern France's most important and greatest naval theorist. He is also the third of what I like to refer to as the holy trinity of modern naval theory. You've got the American Alfred Théerman, you've got the Brit Julian Courbet, and now, of course, we've got the French Raoul Castex. What I want to focus on in this video are three of Castex's arguments, three of his insights that I believe go a long way to explaining the failure of Trump's war against Iran, why we lost. This first has to do with the relationship between military strategy and what we might call total strategy or perhaps grand strategy. The second has to do with the Strait of Hormuz and why it is that geography alone makes American military superiority completely irrelevant. It doesn't matter. And the third has to do with this concept, with Castex's concept of the servitudes. All of this, frankly, is really painful to talk about. I mean, all of this was known ahead of time. It was all knowable. It was all predictable. It was all predicted. I mean, I suppose, look, it's too much to expect anybody to Trump or anybody in his inner circle, frankly, anybody in the Pentagon, to have read Castex. I mean, look, the American government and the American military's view of foreign language is that, you know, to paraphrase the journalist H.L. Mencken, if English is good enough for Jesus Christ, it's good enough for me. So a book's in French, why am I going to read it? What could I possibly learn from the French? This is painful, but the reality is that much of what he wrote, other people have written, plus a lot of Castex's insights are the kinds of things that are sort of self-evident. I mean, maybe you need somebody to point out the obvious before you recognize it, like, oh, duh. But it's not, this isn't like Einstein's theory of relativity. So thinking like getting or grasping the strategic value of holding the Strait of Hormuz is a bit like discovering that things just fall down. It's obvious, but here we are in 2026, and 2026 is the era of I suppose because we've made war an expertise, so it's all about pointing out the obvious, pointing out things like, no, actually, drinking raw milk is bad for you. Don't do it. Now, let's begin with part one, military strategy and total strategy. Castex opened his magnum opus, Théorie Stratégique, Volume 1, there are 5 volumes, by comparing strategy to the light spectrum. And he says, and this is all a lengthy quote, the light spectrum, it has an infrared, which is the realm of politics, and an ultraviolet, which is that of tactics. Just as the spectrum connects these invisible parts with undetectable gradations, strategy is joined to politics and tactics progressively alter to blend with them. Politics, strategy, and tactics thus form a whole, complete, and in no way a triptych of clearly separated elements. All he's really trying to say is this: military strategy has to be understood as one component of a larger strategy that incorporates tactics, politics, economics, etc., everything. I mean, lots of people have written about this. You have to have an overall strategy. And as part of that strategy, you have to understand that military strategy is simply one part of it. It's not even necessarily an important part. It might be a necessary part, but it's seldom, if ever, a sufficient part. This is huge. So if you're thinking about going to war, you need to be thinking about, well, what is your overall strategy here? What are you trying to achieve? What is the value of going to war? There might be a value. It might contribute to achieving your ultimate strategic objective. But how exactly and what precisely does it do, and what are the limits of what it does? It seems really self-evident, but yet we keep blowing this time after time after time. I mean, so it all has to be thought through. What are you trying to achieve? And then you have to think about what are the various means at your disposal, the economic, the diplomatic, the political, and what combination and how. It all has to be thought through. I think it's the thinking through part that we fail at. We just don't think. Part 2, geography. Castex's arguments about Hormuz, the Strait of Hormuz, which can be found in Volume 3. Here's Volume 3. Volume 3. As you can see, I found some bits that were of interest to me. he writes that it's interesting, the language. He says that the land reacts upon the sea. These are not separate entities. On the contrary, he wrote that from a strategic point of view, it is as if the land were overflowing onto the sea, as if the continents were bleeding into the ocean, spreading across them like oil. Maritime operations, therefore, often were tied and even subordinate to land operations, especially near the coast, where the land's reaction was strongest. How near? According to Castex, the distance, the answer to that often is a function of technology, which expanded greatly the distance at which the land can impose itself upon the sea. Thus, we've gone historically from traditional coastal artillery to mines, submarines, aircraft, drones, and ground-launched anti-ship missiles, which these days could have a range of 1,000 miles. Hormuz is perhaps the best example of how the land can dominate the sea, thanks to its narrow width, its length, and the elevation on the Iranian side. Any ships passing through them are exposed at multiple angles. There's very little navies can do to protect them. This is crucial. Navies like the American Navy benefit from space and the ability to maneuver. On the open ocean, the United States Navy has no pier, but none of that matters. It's irrelevant in the Strait of Hormuz. None of that matters in the Strait of Hormuz. What Castex had in mind is a sort of straw man in the form of, let's call it like a caricature of Alfred Thayer Man. Man was all about the organized force, or the fleet, which was the center of all of his thinking. Naval strategy, according to him, was all about having the predominant force, a dominant blue water force that was necessary and sufficient for controlling the sea. So that's Man and his followers are really loath to admit that sometimes geography was more important. So according to Castex, the basic argument of the Maonians is that if my fleet is superior to yours and I enter a given zone, then you have no choice but to return to port and stay there. Castex says that, okay, sometimes this is true. But even then, sea control is temporary because you're predominant only when you're present, but eventually your ships go back home. They return to base, or they go back home or something. And the moment one turns one's back, an enterprising adversary will be able to do all sorts of things, thanks in part to the complicity of the land. And that's a word that he used. The smaller the body of water, the more relevant the land becomes. And the more technology extends the land's reach. Thus, in small bodies of water, particularly in very narrow places like the Strait of Hormuz, the only way to control the sea is by controlling the land. It's a necessary precondition. Naval operations are dependent on ground operations. In more concrete terms, one cannot control the Strait of Hormuz. You can't open it, and you can't keep it open without controlling Iran's coastline. Now, for naval theorists, this is a big admission, and this is what makes Castex, and I think Corbett agreed with him, different from men, which is that, for all their enthusiasm about battleships and big fleets and all that kind of thing, the sort of reality is, well, if you get a little bit too close to the land, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter that much. Because the land matters more. And every person, a naval theorist wants to believe that navies are the most important thing ever, just as air power enthusiasts are all about air power. Air power is the most important thing. These Navy theorists and Castex, he's saying, for all of his enthusiasm, he's like, there are limits to how useful navies are. And in the Strait of Hormuz, a navy is just not that useful. Again, this all seems self-evident, but apparently it wasn't, at least not to the president and to whoever was advising him and anybody in the Pentagon. And my guess is that the president and the advisors and everybody adopted this Maonian, Maonesque logic that Castex was attacking. And thought, right, if I have the dominant fleet, I control the sea. Remember all the times that Trump and others in the administration would boast about how Iran's navy was destroyed. He was right. Iran's navy was destroyed. Iran's navy is nothing compared to the US Navy. But it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. Why? Because of geography. A dominant fleet might be necessary, but it's never sufficient. If you want to keep the strait open, you have to control the coast, the land. Now, one way to do that is by conquering it, right? But that we could do. The United States could do this. But that would require a much, much bigger war than what Trump and, frankly, what most sensible people have an appetite for. And don't take this as an argument for doing it. I'm not like, if only we invaded. No. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, I mean, because I think that would be a disaster for a lot of reasons. I'm not convinced it's even possible for us to control that much space. For one thing, closing the Strait of Hormuz doesn't require your ability to actually sink the ships that go through the Strait of Hormuz. You just have to be able to get off a shot every once in a while to scare the shippers in the shipping industry, in the insurance industry, into not attempting the crossing. That's all you need to do. And given the fact that anti-ship missiles are pretty small, and you can put them on trucks, and you can hide the trucks in caves and have them pop out here and there, this means that the U.S. military is going to be playing whack-a-mole trying to stop this, trying to stop the Iranians from firing off a shot or two. Plus there's the mines, and it's really, really hard to do. Also, successfully seizing Iran's coast, even if it is possible, will require the kind of planning and preparation that, frankly, the Trump administration is incapable of. It's just, it can't do that. Ideally, the people who are responsible for this war would have understood the likelihood that Iran was going to close the strait. It was so obvious. We all knew it. Everybody knew it. I'm sure they war gamed that. They F out of this war, and I guarantee 99% of the scenarios said that they're going to close the Strait of Hormuz. So you have to think about, well, how do we prevent that? What do we do about that? How do we mitigate it? How do we reduce the impact of that? You got to have plans. You got to think it through, because it's an obvious move for the Iranians to make. So, one way we might have been able to stop them if we don't control the strait, we can at least deter them, right? Make it so scary. If you close it, you're going to hurt. But we didn't deter them. And guess what? Whatever deterrence value you might have had is gone, because we hit them with our best shot. To paraphrase Pat Benatar, right? We hit them with our best shot. At least we could do more to hurt Iran, but the reality is that Trump recognized that the U.S. government is not prepared to do more. We don't have an appetite for hurting Iran more than we already have. Thus, that's our best shot. And guess what? Iran's still standing. So now whatever deterrence value there might have been is completely gone. Maybe we could have prepared ourselves and our friends and our allies for the economic shock of closing the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe people could have thought up ways to mitigate their strait's closure or develop an appreciation of how long the war would last. We've got a timer. We know that this thing can only go for a month because of the economic damage, thus we have to plan accordingly. Or what can you do to make sure that the war is worthwhile even in light of the strait's closure? Something like that. This all brings us to part 3, lesson 3 of Castex, which is the servitudes. I've discussed the servitudes before. There are other videos that I've made about this. I put links to those videos in the description, in which I talk about the servitudes. And the basic idea is that the crafters of the total or grand strategy seldom can allow pure military logic to dictate the total strategy. So one of Castex's favorite examples is German submarine doctrine in World War I. There was a submarine lobby that argued with reason that unrestricted submarine warfare was the single most expeditious way to bring Britain to its knees. Other, more thoughtful people, however, argue that this would be a bad thing to do, because unrestricted submarine warfare would bring more of the neutral powers, above all the United States, into the war. And this was not worth the risk, because American participation in the war would weigh far more than whatever the benefits of the economic damage done to Great Britain by further decimating Allied shipping. At some point, the sub-lobby won out. Germany started doing unrestricted submarine warfare, and the rest is history. Castex describes the servitudes as all the things that impinge upon pure military logic, things that argue against doing the most expeditious military thing to do, because guess what? Other priorities are more important. There are other things that are more important. There can be political servitudes, economic servitudes, moral servitudes, and yes, geographic servitudes. Sometimes you can't do this thing because it's going to ruin your economy, or you can't do this thing because it's going to completely delegitimate the conflict in the eyes of everybody. We could just nuke all of Iran and kill all Iranians, but that becomes really problematic for all sorts of reasons. There are a zillion very good reasons not to nuke Iran, and as a result, even though that would be the most expeditious way of winning this war, we're not going to do that. The global economy is on the line, the American economy is on the line, our moral legitimacy, domestic legitimacy, international legitimacy, fertilizer matters, everything matters. So you could seal off Iran's coast with the naval blockade completely and for the duration, but not without profound economic cost to everyone. Is it worth it? That would be like a contest in which us and Iran would be holding our hands over a candle to see who could do it longer. I don't think there's a way to win this, and I guarantee you the Iranians can hold their hands over a candle much longer than we can. Relatedly, we have to manage our relations with other players, the Saudis, the Qataris, the Turks, the Emiratis, the Israelis, etc. Some policies suit some of them more than others. We can't please everybody. Maybe we can only please one. Either way, it all needs to be thought through. You have to prioritize. You have to make tough choices. Whose opinion matters most to us? Whom should we try to please? Whom should we displease? Whom should we help? Whom should we screw over? This is all normal. This is all normal. This is what happens. But you have to be able to think it through, and you have to be able to think it through consciously, deliberately. Things that I don't think our government is really capable of doing. And then there's the servitude of geography. It's really very simple. On a blank sheet of paper, the shorter path between points A and B is a straight line. Everybody knows that. But maybe there's a river in between, or a mountain, or a swamp. Maybe one has to go around the physical obstacle, or take time to breach or to bridge the obstacle. Maybe you can't get from point A to B at all. You got to think of something else. You've got to figure out what C and go to C. The point is that you can't always do what you want, and you can't always do it the way you want to do it. You have to alter your plans in order to take geography into account. The Strait is a geographic feature that cannot be ignored or brushed aside. Anyone thinking about attacking Iran has to recognize that Iran can, at any time, close the Strait if it feels like it. And there's really not much you can do about it. We all knew this, all of us, except apparently the people making decisions in the U.S. government. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe, and consider backing the channel by becoming a member, hitting the thanks button, or buying me a coffee using the link in the description below. If you want to read more about Castex, and I suggest that you do, check out my book, which is called The French Way of War. It's available in English. It's also available in French. In French, it's called Penser la guerre à la française. Same book, just different language. Both are available on Amazon. This book is a distillation of many years of work and thousands of pages of text. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned. There's plenty more in the pipeline. Bye-bye.